The rain fell hard on the broken colony world. It was not the clean rain of Earth, but a heavy gray storm that carried dust and ash from the ruined factories. The sky was dark like smoke, and the wind howled through empty buildings that once held life and laughter. Eli Grant walked slowly down the flooded street, his boots sinking into the soft mud. His clothes were torn and his backpack was almost empty. He had been walking for 2 days since his shuttle crashed in the desert. The transmitter was gone. His food pack had only 1 meal left, and the temperature kept dropping with every hour. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and looked up at the ruined signs in a language he didn't know. The colony had belonged to aliens long ago. Now only ghosts and scavengers remained. When he reached the end of the street, he stopped. There was a sound, a soft cry. Not the wind, not an animal. A small broken voice, almost like a child's whimper. Eli froze and listened again. The sound came from under a fallen roof nearby. Carefully, he stepped over the metal pieces and peered through the shadows. What he saw made him blink in surprise. 3 small figures huddled together, shaking from the cold. Their skin was pale with a faint blue glow beneath, and their eyes were too big for their faces, shining like stars through the rain. They were alien children. Their clothes were torn, and their hands looked too thin, too weak. Eli could tell they hadn't eaten in days. One of them, the smallest, tried to move but fell back into the mud. He looked around carefully. No sign of guards or soldiers. He knelt down slowly so he wouldn't scare them. "Hey," he said softly, though he knew they wouldn't understand. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The oldest child, maybe 10 years old, stepped in front of the others. Her eyes narrowed and she hissed something in her own language. Eli raised both hands to show peace. "Easy, easy, look." He reached into his pack and pulled out the last ration pack he had, a small metal case with an energy bar inside. He opened it slowly and took out half. Then he placed it gently on a dry piece of metal near them and backed away. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The rain kept falling. Then the smallest alien crawled forward and sniffed the food. She looked back at the older one, who gave a small nod. The child took a bite, then another, and tears rolled down her glowing cheeks. She called to the others, and soon all 3 were eating quietly, huddled close. Eli smiled faintly. "Yeah," he whispered to himself. "You were hungry, huh?" He sat nearby under the broken roof, watching the storm roll past. The air smelled of rust and wet dust. The children ate slowly, saving tiny pieces for later. It broke his heart. When they finished, the oldest girl came closer. She pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Leary. Then she pointed to the smaller 2, Morrow and Tessa. Finally, she pointed at him. Eli tapped his chest. "Eli," she repeated it. "Eat, Lee." And then she smiled. For a few seconds, the cold and fear faded. They were just living beings sitting together, sharing warmth in the dark. But then above them, a deep humming filled the air. Eli looked up through the hole in the roof and saw bright white lights sweeping across the clouds. Searchlights. His heart stopped. A patrol ship. He had seen those before. Mercenaries, scavengers, maybe slavers. They hunted survivors, especially aliens, for money. The children stiffened, their glowing eyes full of fear. They knew that sound. Eli acted fast. "Come on," he whispered. "We have to move." He helped the smallest child to her feet and guided them through the narrow alleys. The lights passed overhead, slow and searching. He pulled them into a broken vehicle shell and covered them with a sheet of metal. The humming grew louder, then faded into the distance. Eli waited for a full minute before breathing again. The children clung to him, shaking. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "They're gone. You're safe now." The little one looked up at him and said a word in a trembling voice, something that sounded like home. Eli didn't understand, but the way she said it made him pause. There was hope in her tone. Hope that maybe this strange, tired human could help them find it again. He smiled faintly, even though he knew things were only going to get harder. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's find your home, outside." The storm began to fade, but in the distance, another light flickered in the sky, something much bigger, watching, and somewhere far above the clouds. The first signal of destiny had just been lit. The storm had passed, but the world was still dark. The sky glowed faintly red from the burning factories beyond the horizon. Eli Grant crouched near the ruins, listening to the hum of machines in the distance. The patrol ship was still out there, circling the broken colony like a hungry predator. The 3 alien children slept beside him under a collapsed transport shell. Their breathing was soft and uneven. He could tell they were exhausted. The smallest one had a weak pulse. Her skin had lost its glow. He wrapped her in his jacket and whispered, "Hang on, kid. We'll figure something out." Eli had seen war, famine, and chaos across a dozen colonies, but never something like this. These kids, Leary, Morrow, and Tessa, weren't criminals or rebels. They were just lost. Yet someone wanted them caught, maybe killed. That thought filled him with quiet anger. The night grew colder. Eli scanned the sky again. The searchlights moved slowly, painting bright circles across the dark plains. Drones followed behind, buzzing like angry insects. He checked his sidearm. 2 energy cells left. Not much, but enough for one fight if it came to that. Suddenly, one of the drones drifted closer. Its sensors glowed red and its mechanical wings sliced through the air. Eli's muscles tensed. He motioned for the children to stay quiet. The drone hovered above the wreck, scanning the ground. A beam of light flicked over them, too close. Eli moved fast. He grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and threw it with all his strength. It struck the drone's sensor eye with a sharp crack. Sparks flew, and the drone whirred in confusion, trying to right itself. Before it could recover, Eli lunged forward and smashed it again with his wrench. The machine fell to the dirt, twitching. He quickly ripped out its memory chip and crushed it beneath his boot. No signal sent. No alarm raised. Just silence. The children stared wide-eyed. Leary, the eldest, whispered something that sounded like a warning, pointing toward the sky. Eli followed her gaze. More lights were sweeping this way. They must have noticed the missing drone. "Time to go," Eli muttered. He gathered what little he had, his toolkit, a canteen of half-purified water, and a small energy cell he pulled from the wreck. Then he motioned for the kids to follow. Leary grabbed her siblings' hands and followed quietly, their bare feet splashing in puddles. They moved through the ruins, staying low. The metal walls were cold, echoing every sound. Once they heard voices in the distance, harsh mechanical tones speaking a language Eli didn't understand. But he recognized the pattern of command. Soldiers, trained and efficient, they reached a wide crater filled with debris. Eli helped the kids climb down and took cover behind an overturned transport pod. He checked his wrist scanner. No human signals nearby, only the drones. But the scanner also picked up something strange, an encrypted alien beacon pulsing weakly. It came from the children's direction. He frowned. "You're carrying a tracker?" Leary blinked, confused. Then she touched her arm and revealed a glowing symbol burned into her skin. A royal seal, shining faintly even in the dark. Eli's breath caught. He had seen marks like that before. Royal insignia. Noble houses. High command. These weren't just alien orphans. They were someone important's children. Maybe even royalty. That explained the patrols, the hunters, the secrecy. Eli rubbed his face, whispering, "What have I gotten myself into?" Suddenly, the smallest child, Tessa, started to cry softly. The sound was small but sharp, echoing off the metal around them. Eli put a hand over her mouth gently. "Shh, it's okay. We're safe. We'll keep moving soon." But it was too late. A light flickered in the distance, growing brighter. The soldiers were closing in. Eli's instincts took over. He turned on his scanner again and spotted an old maintenance tunnel nearby. It was narrow and half-flooded, but it led away from the city. He led the children toward it, crawling through the mud and cold water until the light of the searchers faded behind them. When they finally stopped, all 4 of them were soaked and shivering. The tunnel was dark except for the faint glow of the children's markings. Eli leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "You're royalty," he muttered, still trying to make sense of it. "And whoever's chasing you, they'll burn this planet to find you." Leary looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dim light. She didn't understand his words, but she could feel his worry. Slowly, she placed her small hand over his heart and whispered, "Safe." Eli stared at her, then nodded. "So," he said quietly, "as long as I'm breathing." Above them, the patrol ship circled one last time, searching the dark wasteland. The Empire's hunt had begun, but down in the tunnels, a single human had just decided to stand between 3 alien children and an entire galactic power. And in that moment, The universe began to take notice. The tunnel stretched for miles, dark and endless. Drops of water fell from above, echoing like slow heartbeats. Eli walked first, his flashlight flickering weakly, followed by the 3 alien children. The air was cold and smelled like metal and damp rock. He had no clear plan, only one thought: get them far from the patrols. Every sound made him freeze. Every vibration made him tighten his grip on the wrench hanging from his belt. The tunnels were old, maybe part of a mining network, maybe a forgotten route out of the colony. But to Eli, they were a chance, a thin, narrow chance to stay alive. The smallest child, Tessa, was shivering. Her faint blue glow dimmed more and more each hour. Eli paused and crouched beside her. He reached into his bag, broke the last of his ration bar into tiny pieces, and handed them out. The children ate silently, eyes tired but thankful. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll find real food soon." They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. Leary, the eldest, gave a small nod, her face serious despite her age. When they reached a fork in the tunnel, Eli hesitated. One path went deeper into darkness. The other slanted upward toward faint daylight. He knew daylight meant exposure, but also meant hope. He turned toward the light. The tunnel ended at a cracked hillside. Outside stretched the deadlands, miles of gray sand, twisted rocks, and the skeletons of machines half buried in dust. The wind howled across the open plains, carrying fine ash that stung the eyes. Eli scanned the horizon. No patrols, no ships, just silence. "We move now," he whispered. They began the long walk across the wastes. Every step sank into the soft ground. The sun was pale and weak, hidden behind a haze of ash. The air was dry, burning their throats. Eli tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped it around Tessa's face to shield her from the dust. Hours passed. Their water ran low. When the youngest stumbled, Eli lifted her onto his back. She was so light it frightened him. Leary kept walking beside him, never complaining, though her bare feet bled on the stones. At sunset, they reached the remains of an old outpost, rusted towers, collapsed walls, and a cracked satellite dish pointing toward the sky. Eli led them inside, checked every room, and finally found a working heater core buried in the floor. With his tools, he rewired it. The machine buzzed weakly, then came to life, sending out a faint orange warmth. The children huddled close, eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Eli sat across from them, exhaustion pressing heavy on his shoulders. He stared at his shaking hands. Once he had fixed ships and saved crews. Now he was stranded on a dying world, protecting children who didn't even share his species. He looked up when Leary spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. She pointed at the stars visible through the cracked roof and said something like, "Mother and above." Eli frowned. "Your mother? Up there?" Leary nodded. Her small hand drew shapes in the dust, a symbol like a crown surrounded by stars. He realized then she wasn't speaking in hope. She was telling him the truth. Her mother wasn't lost. She was somewhere in orbit. Maybe alive, maybe powerful. Eli leaned back, thinking hard. If what she said was true, there might be a way to signal her. If he could repair the satellite dish outside, maybe, just maybe, someone would hear. He stepped outside, wind slapping against his face. The dish was half broken, wires snapped, panels rusted, but he'd seen worse. He pulled out his tools and began to work under the fading light, tightening bolts and rerouting power. Sparks flashed. The dish twitched, then turned slightly toward the heavens. Behind him, the children watched from the doorway. When he connected the final wire, a faint pulse of blue light shot into the sky. The signal was weak, but it was there. Eli wiped the sweat from his brow. "If your mother's out there," he said quietly, "she'll see it." That night, as they slept inside the outpost, a faint hum filled the air. Something old coming to life deep within the dish. Eli didn't notice. He was too tired, but far above the world, beyond the dust and clouds, a royal ship picked up a strange human-made signal. Inside, a tall alien woman opened her eyes as a screen flashed with 3 familiar faces. Her heart stopped. Her children were alive, and the signal came from a human name she had never heard before: Eli Grant. The next morning began with silence. A thin layer of dust covered everything: the ground, the machines, even the sky. Eli woke to the sound of static from the old satellite dish outside. The children were still asleep, huddled together for warmth. He stretched, bones aching, then stepped out into the gray light. The dish was glowing faintly blue. That wasn't normal. He frowned, checking the wires he had connected the night before. Something had changed. A pulse of energy rippled through the air every few seconds like a heartbeat. He could feel it even in his chest. Eli crouched down beside the terminal, pressing a few buttons on his wrist scanner. The data stream showed strange alien symbols flickering through the signal. It wasn't human tech. The dish was no longer broken, it was alive. Inside the outpost, Leary woke first. She saw the glow outside and ran toward Eli. Her eyes widened. She spoke rapidly in her language, pointing at the sky, then at the dish, then pressing her small hand over her heart. Eli couldn't understand her words, but he understood her meaning. "You think it worked?" he asked softly. Leary nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Eli looked up. The gray sky above seemed endless, but somewhere beyond it, a message was racing through space, reaching places he couldn't even imagine. He smiled a little, though worry tugged at him. "Let's hope the right people see it," he muttered. But far beyond that dying planet, something had seen it. High above the clouds, in the orbit of 1,000 shining ships, the Galactic Palace glowed like a floating jewel. Inside its crystal walls, the Empress of Zir knelt before a glowing hologram. Her golden armor reflected the light of her children's faces, the same faces Eli had saved. "Alive," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're alive." Her advisors rushed in, alarmed. "My Empress, what is this signal? Who sent it?" She stood tall, eyes blazing with emotion. "A human," she said softly. "A human protected them." The room fell silent. Humans were considered primitive by many in the galaxy, barely holding their colonies together. But this one, this Eli Grant, had done what empires could not. He had found and saved royal heirs when entire fleets had failed. The Empress clenched her fist. "Find him," she ordered. "Bring them all home." Back on the planet, Eli was trying to keep hope alive. He had scavenged old batteries, melted wires, and a cracked solar plate to power the dish for a few more hours. But food was running out again. The water recycler had broken in the night, and Tessa was coughing from the dust. Eli carried her outside for fresh air. She looked up at the sky with half-open eyes and whispered something weakly. He followed her gaze. For a second, he thought he saw movement, a thin streak of silver cutting through the clouds. Then another. And another. They weren't stars. They were ships. Eli's stomach tightened. "That was fast," he muttered. He didn't know if they were friends or enemies, but he doubted good things came in fleets. He ran back inside. "We have to move," he said quickly. "Now." The children didn't question him. They grabbed their small satchels and followed as he led them out the back of the outpost. The sky was growing brighter, searchlights scanning again, only this time from higher above. They ran across the sand, heading toward a ridge. The wind howled, throwing dust into their faces. Behind them, the old dish sparked violently, struck by a beam from orbit. The explosion threw heat and light across the horizon. Eli turned once to look. The outpost was gone, buried in fire. But the signal had already done its job. Someone out there had seen. Someone was coming. He led the children into a canyon filled with rock shadows. The youngest clung to his back, whispering, "Home, home," again and again like a prayer. As they reached the bottom, Leary stopped suddenly and pointed upward. Through a break in the storm clouds, a vast ship was descending, silver, smooth, and silent. Its design was unlike anything human-made. The air shimmered beneath it. Eli held his breath. "Is that them?" he whispered. Leary nodded slowly, eyes full of light. The ship hovered for a long moment before a deep horn echoed through the canyon. Eli could feel it in his chest. The sound wasn't a threat, it was a call. A door opened underneath the vessel, sending down a bright beam of blue light that painted the dust like morning sun. Eli turned to the children, unsure whether to run or stay. But before he could decide, a voice, soft and powerful, spoke from the beam in a language he didn't know. The children cried out, smiling through tears. They knew that voice, and in that single heartbeat, Eli understood. Their mother had heard the signal, but he didn't know that someone else had heard it too. Someone who wanted those children dead before they could ever reach their home again. The desert was burning again. The sky boiled with light and smoke as the great silver ship hovered above the canyon. Its blue beam cut through the haze, shining like a sword through the dust. Eli stood frozen at the edge of the rocks, the alien children clinging to his sides, their small glowing hands gripping his torn jacket. For a moment, it felt like hope, like rescue had finally arrived. But then the horizon cracked with thunder. Black dots appeared in the sky, smaller ships fast and sharp moving in formation. The sound grew louder with every second. They weren't from the Empress's fleet. Eli knew that sound. It was the deep growl of hunters. The Empress's ship fired a signal flare into the sky, a burst of blue light meaning peace. Approach with care. The smaller ships answered with red. War. Down, Eli shouted. He threw himself over the children as the first missile struck the sand 100 meters away. The shockwave lifted them off the ground, throwing sand and fire into the air. Eli rolled over the rocks, pulling the kids close. His ears rang, his mouth filled with grit, but he was still breathing. Above, the battle began. The royal ship opened fire, blue energy bolts flashing like lightning. The hunters scattered, circling like vultures, dropping bombs that split the canyon floor. Each blast shook the earth, sending rocks tumbling. Eli crawled behind a half-buried cargo hauler, coughing, trying to keep his eyes open. Leary was crying, trying to protect her younger siblings. "Stay low," he said, pressing her head down. He looked up at the burning sky. He didn't have a weapon strong enough to fight this. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was just a mechanic with a broken plasma wrench and a dead rifle. But those kids depended on him, and that was enough. "Okay, Grant," he muttered. "Think." He glanced around the canyon. Wreckage everywhere. Old mining machines, fuel cells, scrap metal. He saw something. An ancient ore hauler half filled with unstable plasma rods. Dangerous. Perfect. Eli crawled to it, pulling out his toolkit. "Cover your ears, kids," he said quietly. He twisted wires, rerouted power, and lit the emergency charge. The hauler began to hum. It was unstable, shaking violently. He had maybe 30 seconds before it blew. He sprinted back to the children and pushed them into a hollow in the rock. Then he ran toward the open sand, waving his arms. "Hey," he shouted at the nearest hunter drone. "Down here, you metal vultures." The drone turned, sensors locking on him. It fired a burst. The blast threw him backward, searing his arm, but the drone followed, hovering close. Eli grabbed a piece of metal and hurled it straight at the hauler. The strike triggered the overloaded core. A white flash consumed the air. The explosion tore through the canyon like a storm. The drone vanished in the blast, and the shockwave threw more debris into the sky. For a few seconds, the noise drowned out everything. The guns, the screams, even the thunder above. When Eli opened his eyes again, the world was quiet except for the soft hiss of cooling metal. He could barely move, his ears ringing, his skin burned. But the children were alive, hiding where he had left them. He crawled back, every movement aching. Leary grabbed his arm. "Lee," she cried. He forced a weak smile. "Still here," he said. Up in the sky, the Empress's ship descended lower, shields glowing bright. A large beam of light swept over the battlefield, scattering the remaining hunters. The royal guards finally arrived, tall armored figures with glowing blades. They landed like falling stars, cutting through the air with terrifying grace. Eli shielded his eyes as they approached. One of them, clearly their leader, stepped forward. The children cried out in joy, rushing toward the tall figure. The leader knelt, speaking to them in their native tongue. Then the guard turned to Eli. He raised his weapon, scanning the human. For a moment, Eli thought they might attack him too. He couldn't even stand now. He was bleeding, dizzy, covered in dust. Then a voice came from above. A calm, commanding voice that silenced the guards. "Stand down." The air shimmered as a figure descended from the ship's beam. The woman who appeared seemed carved from starlight. Tall, regal, her eyes the same blue as the children's. The Empress. The children ran to her, crying and clinging to her legs. She knelt, wrapping them in her arms, whispering words of love and relief. Then she looked at Eli. He tried to speak, but no words came. He just nodded once. The Empress's eyes softened. She raised her hand slightly, and a medic rushed forward to help him. "You risked everything," she said, her voice low and musical. "You faced my enemies with nothing but courage." "Tell me, human, why?" Eli smiled weakly, blood on his lips. "Because someone had to." The Empress looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her guards. "Take him aboard. Treat his wounds. He is under my protection." As the royal ship rose once more, leaving the burning canyon behind, Eli's vision faded. He heard the hum of alien engines, the soft voices of the children calling his name, and one final thought echoed in his mind. Maybe for the first time in his life, he had found something worth dying for. Eli woke to the sound of silence. Not the cold emptiness of the desert, but soft silence, like the hush of a place filled with warmth and light. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the canyon anymore. He was lying on a bed made of silver cloth, his wounds wrapped in glowing bandages. The air smelled faintly sweet like flowers and metal. A faint hum surrounded him. The walls shimmered gently, alive with color and movement. This wasn't a human ship. It was something beyond his imagination. Everything curved gracefully like it had been grown instead of built. Eli tried to sit up, groaning from pain. A soft voice stopped him. "You shouldn't move yet." He turned his head. A tall alien woman stood near him, dressed in a gown that rippled like water. Her eyes glowed with calm light. "You are safe, human Eli Grant," she said in clear, careful English. He blinked, surprised. "You speak my language?" The woman smiled faintly. "The Empress does, and I am her voice until she comes to you." Before Eli could reply, the door opened. A breeze passed through the room, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. And then she entered. The Empress. She was taller than any human woman Eli had seen, her skin shimmering faintly like polished crystal under the ship's light. Her hair, long and silver white, floated as though it carried its own gravity. Around her neck hung a symbol, 3 glowing circles intertwined, the same shape Eli had seen marked on Leary's arm. Behind her, the 3 children stood in new robes of deep blue. When they saw Eli, they ran to him, shouting his name in their broken accent. "Lee." He smiled weakly and reached out, letting them hug him. "Hey, you 3, he whispered. "Told you we'd make it." The Empress watched them quietly. Then she stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the smooth floor. "You risked everything to protect what was most precious to me," she said softly. "My blood. My heart." Eli looked up at her, unsure what to say. "I just saw kids who needed help. That's all." Her gaze held his. "No one in this galaxy would have done what you did. Not for my kind." He swallowed, noticing the sadness behind her calm tone. "Maybe that's what's wrong with your galaxy." For a second, silence filled the room. Then the Empress smiled. A real human kind of smile, not royal, not distant. "Perhaps you are right." She turned to the guards and waved them away. They bowed and left, the door sealing behind them. Only Eli, the Empress, and the children remained. She walked to the large window at the end of the room. Outside stretched the endless stars, and below, the planet's surface burned faintly from the battle's remains. "Do you know what they call that world?" she asked softly. Eli shook his head. "Graven," she said. "A place of exile. Once beautiful, now dead. My enemy sent my children there to die, and yet, you, a lost human from a broken shuttle, found them first." Her voice trembled, not from weakness but emotion. She turned back to him, her eyes wet with faint blue tears. "You gave me back my life." Eli looked down, embarrassed. "I just did what anyone decent would do." The Empress stepped closer. "Then there are not many decent beings left in this universe." The air between them grew quiet again. The children stood by her legs, smiling softly. Leary reached up and took her mother's hand, then grabbed Eli's hand too, joining them. The Empress looked at the connection and breathed out slowly. "Your courage changed everything," she said. "You fought soldiers, machines, and death itself." "I cannot repay that with words," Eli tried to laugh. "You don't owe me anything." "I was just trying to survive." "But you did more than survive," she said. "You gave hope to my people." She paused, then added gently, "And to me." Eli met her gaze. There was something strange in her eyes now. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. A kind of warmth he hadn't seen in years. He stood, swaying slightly. "Well, what happens now?" The Empress stepped forward until she was only a breath away. "Now, human Eli Grant," she said softly. "You rest. You heal. And when you wake again, we will talk about your place among the stars." Before he could reply, she lifted her hand and the room filled with soft blue light. The warmth washed over him like a dream. His body relaxed. His eyelids grew heavy. The last thing he heard before drifting into sleep was her voice, a whisper gentle but full of power. "Sleep, protector of my children. For tomorrow your destiny begins." When Eli opened his eyes again, everything felt weightless. The hum of the royal ship was steady, and golden light poured through the translucent walls. He lay still for a while, trying to remember where he was. Then he saw them. Leary, Morrow, and Tessa were sitting beside his bed, playing with glowing cubes that floated in the air. When they saw him awake, they jumped up and ran to him, their laughter bright like sunlight. Lee, they shouted together. He smiled, weak but warm. Hey, little stars. You okay? They nodded eagerly. Leary held out a piece of fruit that shimmered with color. For you, she said proudly in her soft, broken English. Eli took it with a grin. Thanks, kid. You've been practicing. Before he could take a bite, the door opened. The Empress stepped in, dressed not in her armor this time, but in flowing silver robes that caught the light like water. Her crown was gone, her hair loose. She looked less like a ruler, and more like a mother. The children haven't left your side, she said softly. They refused food until we brought you back to them. Eli chuckled, looking down at the trio. Yeah, they're stubborn. Got that from their mom, I guess. For a heartbeat, the Empress said nothing. Then she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that warmed even the coldest metal walls. You are healing quickly. My healers say your kind is resilient. Stubborn, Eli corrected. We call it stubborn. The Empress laughed gently, the sound like a melody echoing through the room. Then stubbornness has saved my world. She moved closer to the window, looking out at the stars. Outside, fleets of royal ships formed protective lines and whole worlds shimmered beneath them. Word of what you did has spread across the Empire, she said. A human, stranded and alone, who defied hunters to protect the royal bloodline. They are calling you the Guardian of Stars. Eli stared at her. That's a bit much, isn't it? I just did what was right. Her gaze softened. You don't understand, Eli. In this galaxy, no one helps without reward. You did, even when you had nothing. He shifted, uneasy under her eyes. Guess that's the difference between surviving and living. Silence hung between them again, deep and thoughtful. Then the Empress turned fully to him. You have two paths now, she said slowly. Return to your people, to your Earth. Or stay here, among the stars. My court will honor you, and my children already see you as family. Eli hesitated. The thought of home tugged at him. Green forests, real air, blue skies. But it also felt distant. Earth had turned its back on him years ago when his unit dissolved and his ship was decommissioned. Out here, in the emptiness, he had found something he never thought he'd have again. Purpose. He looked at the children, now giggling and chasing each other around the floating cubes. Their laughter echoed through the royal chamber. Then he looked at the Empress. The light framed her face, soft and golden. There was no command in her eyes now, only quiet gratitude, and something deeper, unspoken. Eli rose slowly, still weak but steady. He stepped beside her, looking out at the stars. You really think there's a place for someone like me up here? The Empress turned her head toward him. There already is. You built it yourself. For the first time, Eli truly smiled. Then maybe I'll stay a little longer. The Empress nodded once, then extended her hand. Then from this day forward, Eli Grant of Earth, you are named protector of the royal line. You will walk beside the crown, not as servant, but as equal. The words echoed like thunder through the ship's halls. The children cheered. The royal guards bowed, and as Eli looked out at the endless galaxy, something in his chest shifted. He was no longer a broken man wandering dead worlds. He was part of something vast and alive. Later that night, when the stars burned brightest, the Empress found him alone by the observation window. You changed more than you know, she said quietly. You reminded my people that compassion still has power. You reminded me. He looked at her reflection in the glass and said, then maybe humanity wasn't such a small thing after all. The Empress smiled, stepping beside him. No, she whispered. It was the greatest gift this galaxy ever received. And as the royal fleet sailed across the silver sea of stars, every world would soon know the name of the man who had faced an empire not with weapons, but with kindness, Eli Grant, the human who became legend.